Okay, for those of you on Zoom, we are in Bryant Park B. This is Wednesday, second day of the Las Vegas Fermented Users Group meeting. We've got Bob Ellington on tap next. He's a guest here at Bull Creek Data, but I'm sure you can probably guess who he works for. He's going to be talking about auto scheduling, the quick scheduling of tasks in change and work orders here in just a moment. So Bob's up next. And I'll turn it over to Bob just a moment here. Okay, Bob, thanks for presenting today. And again, Bob's been an integral part here of the production and executive committee. Thank you so much, Bob. Please take it away.
All right. Thank you. Thank everybody for coming. I know we're the late session in the day and most of you could be somewhere else doing something. So I really appreciate you being here in the first place. So thank you a lot. So if you were in my earlier session, you were hearing me talk about functional service management and our big NASA project. And a part of that project dealt with auto scheduling. And that's what this session is about, is that portion. So again, I'm going to talk about this for those that weren't in the earlier session, that we were part of a big NASA 7120 project that ran for 2 years. And as I said earlier today, NASA designed the 7120 project to build rockets, but then they modified it to a 7120.99 for building software. Because in the early days, they were just building rockets. They weren't doing much software. There weren't computers going on those rockets at that time. And then later on, when they started doing that, they started working out processes to do their software. So part of the requirements that are important to the auto scheduling here was that manual editing of tasks to set the schedule start and end dates, it's painful out of the box. You have to get on the change request. You have to go to the task tab. You have to highlight the appropriate task. You open it up. Then you manually set the schedule start, you manually set the scheduled end date, save the record, and then go back to the CRQ, go to the next task. And you've got to be paying attention to the sequencing and all of this if you're going to try to manually build. And our change templates and task templates that we've put out can run 50 to 100 tasks on a change request. And it's untenable. Nobody's going to do it. And so that's what we kind of ran through. And in this process, we laid out a requirement that we would provide a software solution to facilitate the functional service management piece and do enhanced task scheduling or to auto schedule the task. When they first came with that requirement, I looked at it, all the data and was trying to figure out how things work behind the scenes. And my first answer was, we can't do that. It's just not possible. But I'm not one of those that gives up on that. Even if I say it myself, I turn around and go try to figure it out. And Barb Sodich down here, who is our tester and trainer and everything, will fully attest to how many times I said, we can't do that. And then I gave a solution after. So it happens quite a bit. The other piece is we had to continue to use the out of the box CRQ functionality for change and work orders and the template functionality. And then they wanted us to improve the work flexibility, the workflow flexibility, the timelines and statistics kind of information, and streamline the CRQ administration. And the functional service management, as I said before, ended up being more like a project management thing where you could have multiple change requests and work orders underneath it. Again, here I'm talking about the 7120.99 that was modified for the modification for doing software. So we followed that process when doing all of this. And I showed this in our earlier presentation, but for those that weren't there, the FSM piece is very much data driven. We don't let the users manually set the status on this thing. It's all process driven within the thing. But part of it is you got to pick a service, an action, and a work location, and the source of how the request came to you. Internally, we call that SRM, or externally to us coming from the enterprise service desk is flagged as ESD. That combination of data is used to identify what template to use to build a CRQ or a work order, and whether or not it is a CRQ or a work order. And that's what these tables are for, is to drive that information with data. And showing you here that it builds that primary CRQ request. When you fill that information out, next stage it, push it forward for it. But then we have that ability, I said earlier today, of doing an add-on request. So you can click the green plus button. You can pick different service action and work location. It can be a completely different service that you're dealing with, and it'll pick the appropriate template and build that secondary request onto this. And here again, I'm showing you that the two different CRQs are there with all with their own sets of task templates on it. Okay. And so to make this happen, we had to do some customizations to the out of the box pieces, but we were supposed to keep it as little as possible. And so I added this FSM field over here in order to relate it to that FSM request at the change level. The same as on the work order piece. And at the task level, we added the FSM ID field called list color. And in a little video demo I do in a minute, I'll mention about the list color again. But we use that to identify that certain things have happened to records that are in a table, and we'll color code those items so that you can see it. A piece I did not mention earlier today is I actually, in the preferences, when you're dealing with a table, you can add and remove fields. So I have a field available that shows the list color, so that for our people that are colorblind, they can add that column and they could read that piece of text. That's the other reason that I named the colors explicitly what it's showing, is to make it very evident to people looking at the data. This is a very important field for the auto schedule, is the estimated days that's on the task. So when the task initially gets created through the that create process of the CRQ, I then turn around and go look up information on the task template and pull back in the estimated days that we have stored on the task template. And I have the custops field that I talked about, some of the custops operations that I built in our previous presentation for the FSM is back there. And the main one that we use here is the auto schedule. And then here it is on the task template where we have the estimated days, put on a custom tab. So it makes upgrades easier down the road if things happen to the out of the box. And so here I'm showing you that, unfortunately here I highlighted in yellow to show you the item that I was wanting to talk about here, was that I built a quick and easy task editing tool relevant around the estimated days, scheduled start, scheduled end, and the notes field on the task. Because a lot of our task templates just have a generic description, but if they're in their design process and they're saying, hey, for this one, I want you to hang the router from the ceiling instead of putting it in a rack, they can write it in the notes and to tell the people what they need to do. Okay. And so when you double click on an item, you see it brings in the task ID, and then you can enter information into any of those fields and click update, and it just updates the task. To me, that was what we got into when working with the service managers who would be in here doing this part of it. They didn't want to have to drill into the task to do all that information. They wanted to be able to go through here quickly and just pop it off, take care of it real fast. Okay. So the next piece, I'm going to show you a video with sound of doing the task editing portion right there. When preparing to auto schedule the task on a CRQ or a work order, one of the things you want to do first is to check and make sure that the estimated days are filled in on all the tasks.
As you'll notice here, we have individual tasks that does not have any estimated days. We provided a tool down here that gives you the ability to edit information about that task by double clicking. You double click the item and you see it fills in the task ID below. You can add additional notes now if you want. You can put in the estimated days, or if you wanted to manually schedule the task, you could put in the scheduled start and scheduled end date for this item. In this case, we're looking at a design, development of the design that is going on here. So we want to give this a good value up here. Let's give this a good 10 days. And then we're going to click update. And you'll notice that the task now has 10 days in it, and it changed to yellow within the list. Remember, we had a field behind the scenes on the task that we added to identify list color. And for list color being yellow, it means that the estimated days have been edited. While you can do that for an item that has no value in the estimated days, you can also do it for items that actually have a value in it. The values come from a default that the service managers sit and provide to us when we are setting up the task templates. And so the data pulls from the task template to the task. In this case, you see we had 45 days for hardware procurement. But if you know that the hardware procurement is running behind, you could come in and change this value, say, to 60 days, and then click update on that. And when you do, you see that it also changes to yellow, and it sets the value to 60 days.
That's showing the task editing functionality. And so that is a good way for them to prepare the data the way they want to deal with it before auto scheduling. Okay. The next piece is a video where I do an auto schedule process on this. Okay.
Now that you have all the estimated days set for this particular change request, now we're ready to go auto schedule all the tasks within that change request. Because we have phasing turned on within our change management system, we have the ability to schedule just one phase at a time, or to schedule all the phases in one shot. In this example here, we're going to schedule just one phase. We are going to choose the review phase. Since none of the items have been kicked off yet, the CRQ is still in a draft state, we can schedule that review phase. You'll notice over here on the right that we have the tasks and task groups that are at the change request level, the top level. And because the first item in the task list is a task group, it has its individual tasks in the table below. These tables are used in order to loop through and process all of the tasks within that review phase as we go through this. Also, we need to decide what the start date of the very first task is going to be. In this case, we will pick a date in December. We'll go with December the 1st and set OK. And now that we have all of this information filled in, we're ready to auto schedule. When we are finished with this, you will see that the last scheduled end date fills in. That tells you the date of the end date of the last task that is within this phase as we auto schedule. Here we go. Auto schedule is processing. Auto schedule is now complete. We click OK. You see here it gives you that the last task will end on March 1st of 2022 within the review phase. I'm going to close this, and now you will see that the tasks within the review phase have all been scheduled. And as we scroll down, you'll see the business approval and the implementation phases have not been scheduled yet.
So, as I said there, I designed that so that you can do one phase at a time, because we had some scenarios that were happening that at the end of the review phase, things would just go into a hole that had nothing to do with our system. You know, they're going back to the customer, and the customer's delaying the thing and this kind of stuff. So they have the ability now to come back and auto schedule the business approval phase, and it may start 3 months after that last end date on the review phase. It's entirely possible. and then they'll keep going from there. So we had to give them that kind of a flexibility for it.
You have to worry about the schedule starting dates on the change request being within that window.
I actually thought I was going to have a problem with that. As you all know, that sometimes you get funky error messages if the dates are out of range of that. But after doing it this way, I've not had an issue with it. And it does seem to be tracking it. So I think something else must be happening if you do it manual, that they're tracking something somewhere else that puts that in play. But it doesn't seem to happen with what I'm doing here. And so I'm not going to worry about it right now.
I think that's because they do all error checking as active ones versus focus on.
I think it is too. Yeah. And all this is happening kind of behind the scenes to it. So none of that's in play.
So at the end of the day, you come back and set the schedule start on the change request from the beginning time to the end time, which you set your task to?
Actually, I do not. It generally, as they move forward, it asks somebody to fill that in on the change request. As you know, you reach a certain status, and we leave it up to the change coordinator or the change manager, whoever's moving that forward, to sit there and look at those values. And that's part of the value of giving them back what that end date is, so that they can use that to figure all that out. Yeah. Unfortunately, I leave that part as a manual for them.
So it gives us some control too, is the validation.
Yeah, and just because this is what we auto schedule doesn't mean that's what they're going to follow. As we all know, I'm sure everybody's thing is well, you're due here, and some groups just don't care. They just do what they want to do, irrelevant of what you schedule.
Another option would be on the actual change request on the task tables, is to make that an editable field for schedule start in, and be able to apply it directly from there as well.
Yep, that's correct. Yep, not a bad enhancement idea. I like it. Thank you. And again, here I'm showing you how the review phase is all scheduled. The business approval and the implementation phase is not scheduled at all with that. So now I'm going to do you a video that shows you scheduling all the phases in one shot. Now, part of that deal of doing the one phase allows you to delay the start of the second phase. If you choose to do all phases, I can't allow you to do that. So as soon as you get a date for the last one on the first phase, I got to use that for the start date of the next phase and just assume that you're going to go in a process. You know, it's an assumption that the tool has to take in just to get through it. So.
In this example of auto schedule, we're going to show you how you can auto schedule all phases within a change request. So we're going to reprocess the same change request that we scheduled the review phase on before. One of the features that have been built into this is the ability to reschedule a phase that you've already scheduled in order you can change when you want to start. You can change your estimated days, for example, as long as the first task within that phase has not already been completed or canceled. So in this case, you'll notice that our first task is still sitting in a staged status. So we don't have a problem with auto scheduling this one. So we'll go ahead and click auto schedule. Now, unlike with the one phase at a time where you select an individual phase, this time we're going to click yes, we want all phases. This will close up that field so you can't pick the phase. And you'll notice it did not fill in the task and task groups on the right over here. That's because when those tables are used for processing, there's another table behind the scenes that is going to be used to loop through the individual phases and then process within those tables as we go. We still need to set the planned scheduled start date for the first phase. In this case, we're still going to choose December 1st, just like we did before. Click OK. And now we're ready to auto schedule all the phases. What you're going to see when it processes is the individual phases will crop up in the list up here, processing through one at a time. And when it's finished, It'll give you a dialog saying it's done, and you'll see a date in the last scheduled end date. So here we go, auto schedule. There it goes for the review phase, business approval, and then implementation. And now it is complete. And you'll see that the last scheduled end date is given to you of 9/14 of 2022. Now, if you're planning this out and decide that this change request needs to finish a little bit sooner than that, then you've got a couple of options here. One option is to go back to those individual tasks and edit the estimated days on some of those tasks like we showed before, and then come back and re-auto schedule everything. Or you could choose that I need to start sooner, so you can change that phase schedule start date and reprocess them again. So now we're going to accept what we have and click close. And when you come back out, you'll see that once again the review phase is all filled in for scheduled start and scheduled end dates. But notice that the business approval and now the implementation phase, they're all scheduled out. So the entire CRQ is fully scheduled out and ready to go. Hope you enjoyed today's presentations. Thank you.
So one piece I failed to mention in my videos is that I don't allow you to backdate that schedule start date for the first item. It has to be future in order for everything to function. That was a requirement that we had on it, that we did not want them to be able to backdate things and pretend they've done work they haven't done, right? And so you're seeing me show the date of December 1st. Obviously, from this perspective, that's in the past for it. But when I was doing the video, that was still several days in the future. So I had room to pull a time back if I wanted to reschedule and so forth. So that's the key, is that you're really planning probably that your change request won't start for another month or two when you're doing this. You may be a while before you get to it because you got some other communications to do and so forth that are not tasks within the system. So you plan it out. Or you got other projects going on and you just can't get to it right now. So you plan it out for the future as a future project that you're doing. And so that's why you look at that and give them that ability to reschedule it over and over again and not hurt anything.
NASA doesn't have a time machine? Oh, sorry.
That's the next project.
I noticed when you were setting up the schedule, you had change request status on there. Why was that a concern?
So the reason that was, it's not that it's necessarily a concern, it was to give information, especially if you were doing different phases, is to see where it is in the process of the change request. Like if you're going to do implementation phase and so forth, it's just providing information. Okay. So
How are you handling weekends and stuff like that? Are you using business hours or?
thank you for asking that question. That was a piece I meant to talk about, and I'll probably talk about it a little later in here. But when I go through it, I actually use business time to calculate everything out. What I ended up doing when you're calling business time, you have to identify the time segment that you care about, that you want to use in it. So we went and set up a special central time zone business time and put all our holidays on it. And so we've got holidays in there that are 6 years out, because some of these go close to 6 years out in their tasking. And so you got to get all that in place in order to calculate properly. So every year we go add the holidays for 6 years away. So yeah, thank you for asking that. That helps. So now I want to take you into a little bit of a deep dive of what's going on behind the scenes with the auto scheduler. So as you saw before, you pick the individual phase and I show you the tasks and task groups. This one is all task groups, so it looks like that's all it is task groups up top. But anything that's at the that first layer of the review phase, that's essentially behind the scenes, it's at the same layer as the change request itself. So its master is the change request, as opposed to the task group being the master of the task that's in a task group. right? So it's looking at those and it's hunting the sequence ones right off the bat. So if the sequence one was a task, then it would go immediately and use that phase schedule start date to say, go auto schedule this with this being your start date, right? If it's a task group, then it's looking in the next table and it's hunting a sequence one in there and going to apply what you put in as a phase schedule start date to that. So it knows this is the first task that's going to get a date on it, put it on there. You may have multiple sequence ones. They'll all get that same first date on it. But from there forward, you got the tool goes and calculates and figures out what is, if I had multiple sequence ones, which one was the longest, figure out that's end date and use it as the start date for the sequence two task that's after it. Okay. And wait a minute, I think that went. Yeah, and that was where I talked ahead of my slide. So I don't go into the details of showing you what's in the active links, but believe it or not, this is all the active links it took on that dialogue in order to handle all of the processing on the left of you clicking things and to handle all the table looping to say, go process this task. And the way this actually works is it goes through the table, finds the task, and it does a push fields action to the task to the custops fields that says auto schedule. You saw earlier I had that in my custops options. It also passes that phase schedule start date over to it and a couple other little pieces of information in order to help processing.
Hang on a minute, Bob.
Sure.
You said that's all the active links you have.
It's all the
Those-
active links.
Those within ALG, are those not guides?
No,
Those call the
that's
guides.
calling a guide.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, that's one of my
Naming convention.
that's one of my naming conventions that I put in there. I like to say call the such and so, and I try to give the exact name of the guide and I stick ALG on the end of it. If I'm doing a filter, I'll do FG on it. Just, it makes it quicker for me to just look at the name and know that's what this is. Because when you get a long name, sometimes you miss the word call being in the middle of it on the thing, and having that on the end is just a trigger for me mentally to see it. Okay. And then this is all the guides. They're in it. So what I first looked at, and I thought, this is a beast. I don't know how I'm going to make this happen. And then when I came out with developing, I was like surprised how little workflow I ended up putting on it. But some of the reasons, and here's where I'm talking about pushing in certain information over here to this on push fields. I'll get to the other stuff that other challenges I did development in a minute. And so that's the key, is you tell that task, go auto schedule yourself. Instead of trying to auto schedule them all within that table and grouping, it says, go tell that one task to auto schedule itself. And what it does is it comes back and it kicks off a filter that's looking for custops equals auto schedule. And then it calls a service that's actually in that same dialogue form, right? So I built all the service in the same form. So all of the presenting to you as a dialogue and you picking is in that form. And then all the service, which is filters off of a dialogue form, right? To a service. And I call that back and I pass in certain information. I pass in the custops, I pass in the task ID, the root request ID for it. I pass in the estimated days and that scheduled start date that we filled in at the front for it. Okay. And then the output mapping is simply the scheduled start and scheduled end dates. So in other words, update me the task with what my scheduled start and end dates are by calling this service. And I'm giving you some info so you can go figure out what my scheduled start date is.
Well, can you explain for people who weren't here what the custop actually is? It's not a standard remedy term.
Yeah, the custops is a display only field that is set up to accept that if you put something in it and click save, it recognizes that something changed so that modify actions can trigger on it. And then I usually have, in this case, I have a custops explicitly on submit and modify looking for this one particular thing because it's added onto the task. There's no point in making a bunch of filter guides for custops against it on it. But a lot of times I'll use a single filter to say, hey, did custops get modified? If so, run this guide over here. And then you got a bunch of filters looking for values of the custops in order to process. Okay. So as you see here, you see the tab on the left that's auto schedule. That was the one you were seeing as the dialogue the users get. That's what's on the auto schedule tab. These other tabs are hidden tabs behind the scenes to them. And so where you saw on that filter where it was pushing certain fields to the service, these are the fields it's filling in. But all these other fields are things it's got to use to go look up and figure out where I am I in a guide? You know, what is my previous task in the process, right? And it does that because I've got these tables that I built back here that actually do an inverse lookup, where you looked at them to begin with, you were seeing the task in sequence, 1 to 50. Over here, I'm showing you in reverse sequence so that you can figure out what is my previous task. Because when I first went at it, I was thinking, I'm gonna have to loop through all of my tasks to find the one that's mine, then go back one. No, I just reversed my thought process and made the table help me find the one that was previous straight up. So the first one in my list is my previous task when I'm looking at it.
I bet that was an epiphany. Because you're probably thinking of all this custom code. You
Well,
gotta find this thing and
this
get a
is-
value.
And
set it
this is
over
how
here.
I got through it with a lot less workflow than I expected. And so obviously the item that's previous could be a task group. And so I have this other table over here to loop within a task group where I'm doing the same thing. I want to see the last task in the task group and get what its, latest end date. But I may have multiple tasks that have the same sequence. And so I have to go through at least that same furthest out sequence and come back and figure out which one has the furthest out end date. Okay. These are the filters that are on it. It was a lot less filters, and this is the ones on the service form portion of it. These are the filters happening there. So when you call the service, it's triggering this custops auto schedule service filter first. Okay, and then it's got these 3 guides that are used to loop those tables that I was showing you, including. So when you're dealing with the multiple phases, though, there was some additional workflow that had to happen. So you pick in the checkbox for all phases and put your schedule start date. And so there's a whole nother tab that has the loop of phase values. So it's entirely possible you could edit your system and add additional phases to your change request. I don't recommend it, but I know places that have done it. So by doing it this way, I'm looping the actual data that says here are the phases that we're using within this, and using that in order to figure it all out. So in conclusion, this thing is very highly automated. I was able to reduce customizations of the out-of-box forms quite a bit by doing this. And I greatly reduced their time to set a scheduled dates on task. You saw how many were on there. Imagine having to drill into each one manually and then keep up in your head what the end date you used on the previous sequence. It's not about the previous task you just did, because you could be in the middle of a whole group of sequence 5 tasks. And I got to remember what my last date on my sequence 4 was in order to set every one of them manually. Not only that, I'd have to, if I'm strictly using out of the box and I don't have estimated days down there to look at, I got to figure out how many days, which means I probably got a spreadsheet over here that I'm having to go look at to figure out what we decided all that was. And in the previous thing, with the FSM piece where I was showing you all the statistics, the idea of the statistics is to be able to look at what actually happened and do that over a group of similar change requests so that the manager can go back and say, you know what, we put down 10 days for this design, but we're seeing that every one of them's running 20. Let's go edit that task template and say now 20 is our default estimated days. So they can use that as a feedback loop to identify what they need to be doing.
You forgot a bullet point, Bob.
I did? Which one?
Data driven.
It is very data driven. You are correct.
And where's the dev file for this now?
It's at nasa.gov.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I wasn't on the questions slide yet. You can't ask that. So.
Vinay,
So
can
where's the dev file?
other questions in the room? Yeah, go ahead, Kate.
I've always kind of tried to steer people away from change requests for this long time frame of changes, more from an implementation change, push people more towards release. Is there a reason that you get more down the release route than the change route? Is it just historically
So-
we're used to change, or?
So do you want the real reason, or do you want something that's okay? Because you want the real reason, we'll need to turn the mic off just in case. But basically the release process as it is out of the box requires that you set up particular sets of permissions for the release manager and all this kind of stuff. And it was all we could do to get them to use change. They still don't even really ascribe to change coordinator and change manager very well. They just don't want to go and do the work that a change coordinator ought to be doing for this stuff.
It's always causing me problems like with the change calendar and stuff like that.
We don't even bring up the change calendar.
Yeah, so I mean, it's been around for 6
Yeah.
months.
Yeah, smart reporting is our friend. One of the pieces that, I got a few minutes here that wasn't part of this deck. One of the things we ran into is they started running some reports around tasks to see if things were getting done based on the scheduled dates, right? And what was happening is, so let's say you had a task to go do something, and he had a task right behind you, and he had 3 days to do his task, but you were 6 days late getting yours done. And so by the time his kicked off, he was already late. And he was the one that was getting beat up on the reports because his was the one now flagged as being late.
Right.
So I built in a feature that we called auto late. And so what I do with it, it's a filter that happens first off, if you're late doing your task, I change the list color on yours and make it red to show that you're late. And then I send a notification to the change manager that you were late. But then I'm very kind to him, because if you're late 3 days or 6 days, I move his scheduled start date and his scheduled end date forward 6 days. But I set a color on it to let him know that this one had to be adjusted.
It was pushed to the right.
But you have the ability, maybe he's got 3 days, but maybe he can get it done in 1, and he helps the schedule to try to correct it back. I didn't want to push every task after that forward, because somewhere in there, these guys could get us back on schedule. But it was by color coding it, I was able to put it in front of everybody so they could see we have opportunity in a couple of these to
What
improve
would
it.
happen with his in that scenario where even if you did get it, if you got it done in 4 days, it
Yeah.
still hasn't caught up the 3 days that you lost or whatever.
Right. But if, let's say he,
One's still green.
let's say he gets it done in 2 days. He got done early, so it stays green that he got done early, right? The next guy is technically late getting started, so I move him forward because, and it was the trickle down from yours,
Right.
but he's also flagged with opportunity to improve. So maybe he's got 10 days. If he can bring it back, 4 days or something,
And you're
he's got you back on schedule. And then the next one's right in line with where it belongs.
And so, I mean, I really see the value of this from more of like, it's almost a project management
Mhm.
capability really within the tool.
Yep.
But to me, it seems like it falls more in the release realm than it does in the change request realm. So
Yeah,
I'm thinking how I can grab it from there and try and.
You could do it with hours though instead of days. For deployment, that's how we use our change managers, is a deployment. Somebody have something that lasts more than a week, if that, and that's extreme.
Yeah.
So I can see using this, but instead of saying number of days, maybe number of hours.
you could.
Something to that effect.
For us, we're a networking contract, so things get done in years sometimes. I mean, because some of what we get is a change request to build out a whole new network and a whole new building that is being put up. So they start designing before the building's finished, right? So you've got all
But
these,
again, that's still
Right.
leads more to the release cycle, because then you can have the actual changes to say, hey, we've got to take this switch down.
Yeah.
All of that would be bundled into
Yeah.
one.
But-
But
but-
I understand historical stuff messes stuff up all the time.
Yeah. but as you saw back on the FSM, they had all that additional data they wanted to track. Even then, what you're saying is move that into the release form.
Yeah, the FFS.
And that's not a good idea. I don't want to put that kind of
That much data.
data into an out of the box form. And so I wrote it as an outside wrapper around the
So essentially your
ITSM.
FSM becomes the release. I mean.
It does.
The project.
It's the whole project management. It is I listed it as an SRM tool because we quit using SRM because it didn't ask enough questions. We couldn't make it ask enough questions and put them where it would represent somewhere.
So we use it like the front end
Yeah.
of change management. But for a normal change request, that's one important piece. Other types of change requests don't use FSM, but all normal change requests go through FSM. So we have benefit of all that data.
But really, it's more of a big project management.
It,
It is.
yeah, it really is.
Tool where you combine everything together.
And we try to make, as she said, all the normals go that way. And there are some change requests we get done, they're done in days.
Yeah.
There are some that come through and they're done in days, but we put them through that same process so that we can do all of our high level reporting at the FSM level instead of at the change level for stuff. Because they want to know at project level, where are we on stuff? And if you've got an FSM that's got 15 change requests under it, because you're doing 1%er for this same request going out, then they don't want to see 15 different things. They want to see one. Where are we on this? So the same's true for that smaller one. Where are we on this? Well, it's all reporting at exactly the same place. We're not having to run a different report for those and so forth. Everything's kept the same.
The other thing Bob didn't tell you necessarily is that in our world, the service managers, in order to know what was happening, had multiple people that had multiple services. They had to belong to all the groups that associated with their services. So with this, they have a tool, a console
Yeah.
that Bob built, where as a service manager, they can go in and see just the things that are associated with their service. So for them, it added another level of opportunity to actually see
Yeah.
information about the things that were happening in their world, just their world. Because you know how aggravating it is to see hundreds of tickets on your console when you only are interested in one or two. So that Bob's console really has a lot of really cool features that he did there.
Yeah,
as well.
I didn't show the console in this because I was worried about time and everything, but I built a full-scale console for it that you can actually go in and choose that to be your console as opposed to the overview console on the thing. And from there, you go in by default and it says, show me every FSM that's connected to me personally. So if I'm the service manager, or if I'm the CSR involved, if I'm the one that requested it, all of that, show me everything that has me connected to it in some way, and that's their default. But they can change and say, only show it to me where I'm the CSR. Only show me everything there is that's open. Boom, you can get that too. And I've got sections off to the side that give you counts of the different things within the different statuses of the FSM. And you can then go over there and click, oh, I only want to see the ones that are, you know, awaiting strategy assessment. Boom, I can click that. Here's all the strategy assessment ones right there in front of you. But yeah, I didn't put all of that in here because I was afraid I'd run out of time.
The future, just the auto schedule, like I said, I think that's a big, especially from project management side of things, being able to manipulate tasks that there, I think you can use that in multiple ways.
And
because nobody wants to go in and assign a digital start and stop date, like you said, on each individual task. But it provides value if you have the data there, and if you can auto adjust it like that.
yeah, and in theory, you could build that auto schedule doing the same concept I did and have the button that triggers it come off the change form itself. You don't have to have it as an FSM to do it.
Right.
For us, because we were doing part of that project, it was part of project management. That's where we put it. But you know, it could have been built right on the change and do it from there.
Sounds like a V-Road presentation, Bob.
What, how to do it yourself? No.
No, to show Kate your the console.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, I could possibly do the console of the V-Road.
yeah, you hit the FSM and then just like in the application consoles where they have the information at the bottom. Yeah, something similar to that. It shows the CRQ or queues for work orders as well as the tasks. And then you can actually change it to look at another component that.
Yeah. The main list is the FSM numbers. You highlight an FSM, it shows you the one-to-many CRQs and work orders. It default highlights the first one, and it shows you the tasks for that one right there. It's just quick info for most of them service managers because they don't even want to drill into the FSM.
They don't want to look at tasks either. They just want the status.
Yep.
Are we on time or are we not on time? That's why.
We got 2 minutes. We're good.
I think we need to push your schedule back. Reschedule.
I could do that.
Get
So
get that NASA time machine out.
in case you need the info here you go. That's how you get in touch with me.
Any other questions? Thank you, Bob. I really appreciate you sharing this. It's great information.
And I'm looking forward to Birds of a Feather to find out how my solution compares to yours.
It's a completely different.
Fantastic.
Add something, Bob.
All right. Thank y'all.